All right. Perfect. Okay, well, I think we'll get started now that we have the majority of folks that have registered. Welcome. I'm so delighted to be here with you today. If I haven't met you, my name is Jana Saylor, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am the artistic director and founder of the Vancouver-based Allegra Chamber Orchestra, which is a professional all-female orchestra dedicated to social action through music and championing the works of female and minority composers. I'm coming to you today from the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, the Nakota Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, currently known as cold and snowy Calgary, Alberta. And I'm delighted to welcome you from all over Canada. We have a wide variety of folks joining us, so you are most welcome. So as mentioned, Allegra's mandate is to champion the works of female and minority artists and work towards diversity and equity on our stages. And this series of workshops and events really is to help facilitate that in a very practical way through education and granting ourselves the opportunity to hone our professional development muscle alongside with our art form. And this workshop is presented as part of our Composer Incubator mentorship program for female and minority composers. And we currently have 6 wonderful mentees paired up with mentors from across Canada. They are established composers and working with our wonderful fleet of emerging composers. And today's workshop will be approximately 60 minutes in length, and we'll have some time for Q&A throughout. So just raise your hand as we go through, and or utilize the chat, and I'll do my best to make sure that we're grabbing your questions as best we can as we go, and then we'll have a longer Q&A session at the end. And as mentioned, it is recorded, so I will make this available to all the participants today that are in attendance. And I should also mention that this workshop is made possible by the generous support of the BC Arts Council, as well as the City of Vancouver. All right, so without further ado, I will just introduce our wonderful facilitator and composer, Farshid Samandari, who for those of us that are based in Vancouver, we have him as one of our wonderful colleagues. He is very active with the Vancouver Intercultural Orchestra as one of their composers and residents. And he's also collaborated with a variety of choirs, ensembles, including the Tehran National Symphony Orchestra, Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, Esprit Orchestra, experimental studio ensembles from around the world. And he's also on faculty with the Bahá'í University and the composition faculty, the Cassalmaggiore Festival, and the Roadrunner Trio Academy in the Netherlands, among many other accolades and awards. So I'm delighted to have him here to share some of his experience and expertise with us today. So please welcome Farshid.
Thank you. We are in a very strange, interesting times. First, I want to apologize, which is not a good sign to start with an apology, but I want to apologize for the fact that I might be a little bit slower than normal. I don't claim that I'm a very fast person, but I'm a little bit slower because one of my cousins, I heard that she had COVID and passed away just last night. And I'm a little bit kind of like in awe. In fact, the reason that I'm still alive and here is because at the time that I was fleeing with the family for our lives, she gave us a refuge. So she was a little bit too dear to my heart. So anyhow, I'm back in like 30 years or 30, 40 years old, 30 years, yeah. Anyhow, I thought that I may give that reference because in some ways it relates to the main topic that I want to talk, and you might be confused at what it is that I want to talk. Uh, my training, despite the fact that often everyone sees me as a Persian or a Baha'i or thinks that I'm writing for non-Western instruments a lot, uh, was an ethnomusicology and wasn't Persian music. I was trained as a Western classical musician, pianist, and composer. In fact, if I go with the European training system that I received, my roots goes back to Hindemith directly and Franz Liszt. So like my teachers, piano teacher was one generation student of Liszt, and then my composition teacher was was a student of Hindemith. And as such, I learned many problems that I kind of like I would like to address right away. For instance, I remember one of the first things that I saw at the time, Yo-Yo Ma was an up and coming cellist. And I was so excited to find a recording of him playing some of the Bach partitas. I remember sharing it with my piano teacher, and her reaction was that I'm not sure if a Chinese person can play German music. They don't have the sensibility. I'm kind of like, I was just wondering, what do you mean they can't play? So what is wrong with their training or with their being that they can't do it? You're Armenian, Iranian, and I'm Iranian, and I'm kind of like, I appreciate Bach and I try to play it, and you're playing it really well. You went to Germany, studied with such fantastic teachers. No one complained that you're not capable of playing Bach. What's the problem with that? So I start to learn that basically we have built some unfortunate prejudices for ourselves that basically cause problems. And I saw it, I've seen it in many different forms, and even just the opposite, like, oh, like a white Dutch person won't be able to play shakuhachi. It's just the same thing. So I guess the first topic that we need to think of is that this is this has become part of our entities and beings, and we have to fight it. Even if you're in the minority or under pressure and kind of like being labeled as someone that doesn't have access to everything, we need to be very vigilant about it. But what does it have to do with writing I guess the first thing we need to do as composers, we have to listen and hear the sound, and then try to find how to interpret the sound that we heard or imagined onto paper. But we need to remember that actually when we are interpreting it, we are dealing with humans who are going to be our interpreters. And everyone, as I said, has their own prejudices and in many different forms. So sometimes it's very directly that, oh, you're Persian, you won't be able to write a counterpoint. And as I've seen it with VSO at one point, that what is it that you're doing with this piece? Why do you have counterpoint? Or it's other stuff, which is understandable. I'm not complaining that people have that, but I kind of like, I like to see how we can overcome the hurdle or the problem. So one of the things that we need to do is actually to understand where they are coming from, what they are actually talking about, and what are their concerns. And then perhaps we could speak their language and present the material to them in a way that it's accessible and they can understand it and they can relate to it. And we could then start to have a conversation, which would end up being performance of your piece. So it doesn't matter if you're writing for a flute player or for a cellist or for a tar or shakuhachi or anything. The first step is actually to learn where they're coming from. Obviously, when you're dealing with flute and cello, much of the work is already done through your training as a Western musician. You know the instrument, you know the repertoire, hopefully, you know how the instrument functions, hopefully, you know how to deal with it, and there's a gamut of like even new experimentations with the instrument and new notations that you could use. But when we get to instruments that are less used, let's say a tar or shakuhachi or viola d'amore, you are facing another problem, which is what is the repertoire? What is the musical language that the musicians are used to? What is the exact terminology that they are used to? And how you can present them with what you want in a way that they can get it very quickly, they can relate to it easily, and they can be championing your music without having too many conversations and lots of back and forth, because time is of essence. And if you can't make that connection right away, often there's difficult to actually, it's very difficult to actually make it later. So you need, at the same time, you don't want to sell it too cheap. You don't want to write bad music. You don't want to you copy yourself. You want to experiment, you want to explore, you want to expand, you want to move forward. But at the same time, you want to be yourself, write the music that you like. But then if you're using another medium that has a different language and lingo and repertoire, the first step is actually, again, listening and hearing what's going on in their musical realm. Uh, the other thing is that after perhaps listening and hearing what's going on and what is the idioms that is used, then perhaps you would find some commonalities with what you're doing and the way that you have been trained. So uh, often a process that could be done, for instance, if you're writing for a flute and cello, if uh, preparation would take a month or two. If you're writing for shakuhachi and arhu, if this is the first time you're writing, preparation might take much longer. Might take a few months. Might take more energy, and you would realize that actually uh, people are less willing to provide the information. Not that they are not interested, it's just because they're not used to. So it's the same as if you approach some of the best flute players and tell them that like you're writing for them and what is the repertoire that you like to play. They usually don't want to share that, or what techniques you like most. Often they won't say because there are specifics and there are so many of them. So it's the same thing with, like, if you want to work with a shakuhachi player, if you tell them that what pentatonic scale you like most, they don't know, or maybe they know, but it just, there are too many of them. Or what technique you like, there are hundreds of them. Which one they should pick and why they should pick this one or that one. So basically, we need to think that we need to do the work, and we shouldn't expect them to do the work for us. But we could be inquisitive and we could ask the question in a way that they can respond. So rather than just giving them a very bland, like a general question that would require them to do lots of work, we need to do some work. We need to have some study of the instrument, and then come with almost acceptance that everything that we have read and studied is potentially correct, potentially correct. I'm just staying on a positive side, but there's a large chance, there's a high chance that everything that we have found on internet and published books, even the like university editions, there might be lots of errors in them because the topics are often less studied or less criticized, and so it is open to interpretation, and there are lots of schools of performance in each culture that often we don't have a chance to go and talk to, and so you may run into one that is kind of like not necessarily the same as the one that you have studied. I had the experience like working with a show player, and I was just studying a book by one of the most famous Japanese composers, Minoru Miki, on instrumentation, which is the authority on instrumentation of Japanese instruments. And it happens that basically his chapter on show is in collaboration with two show players that represent two different schools who are not the same school as the show player that I was working with. So as a result, I prepared and learned and knew everything. I thought that I know everything about the instrument. I've worked with her as well. And then when I presented her with the sketch, it just, oh, I can't do this way, I can't do this that way, and this doesn't work. And why did you use this octave? Why don't you use this octave? And even just a notation, like I rather to do octave transposition rather than not showing it in the score. Uh, and then I realized that, okay, her school is using completely a different standard than the ones that Minoru has used. And so as soon as I mentioned Minoru's name, it was as if I cursed her and just, no, Minoru Miki is wrong. It's not the correct system. And you have to accept it, that basically just different traditions is the same thing as Western instruments. You would see it less, but people would say, I can't play it. With cultures, often they would just argue with you and talk a little bit more. But again, it depends. Sometimes they would say that it's unplayable. Sometimes they even play it, but they hate what they're playing and they don't put they only play the notes. They don't play the music. So you won't go that very far with them. I remember a few years ago, we were meeting a very famous, perhaps the most famous barabat player who was living in Vancouver at the time. He's not in Vancouver anymore. And he just came back from a collaboration with London Symphony Orchestra. So we were talking to see if he's interested to do some collaborations with Canadian composers. And he said that, okay, let me show you something. So he came and he presented the recording of that project, which was quite fantastic, very, very good orchestra and nice playing. And then we look at him and said, okay, what do you think about this? He said that it was very good for them. And we look at him, what do you mean it was good for them? It wasn't good? Said that, no, it was very good for them. And so I asked him, Hossein, what do you mean it was good for them? You didn't like it? He said that, no, it was awful for me. It was good for them. They enjoyed playing with me. I didn't like what they were doing. I didn't understand what's going on. So at the end, he left the project. He went for the project because they were paying him good money. He worked with them, but he didn't really enjoy and understand what's going on because there wasn't much communication. They gave him the notes, come, play, leave. That was a gig. And the end result was that if they ask him to promote it or talk about it or play it another place, he's not going to do it. He doesn't care because he didn't really connect with the piece. So that's a big challenge when we are dealing with cultures, like how you can bridge, how you can connect, how you can understand. So you need to ask a basic question, like where the music is coming from, and it's basically as varied as the number of cultures and that we are dealing with. Like an Indian music, where it's coming from, what's the way of playing, what's their mode of playing, what's their mood of playing, and where they play it, why they play it. And often you would realize when you're asking these questions, it would take him forever to explain, and it would take years to talk and make the connection. But then as soon as you make that connection, they would start to appreciate you because they realize that you're respecting them as a colleague, as an equal. You're not looking down and say that, okay, how do you do this thing on your instrument? Because that is just, yeah, I need to do this thing and you need to do it for me. It's very different than like, how do you play the music? Why do you play it? Like, I remember when I was working for my opera with no singers. First of all, the preparation took 4 years. So 4 years I was traveling and going back and forth to Japan and talking to these guys about the culture and the context of the no, and how they are doing it, they're dancing. And after like the second year, we got to a point that actually they look at me and said that, okay, what type of work you want to do with us? So after like 2 years, the first door was open that we could start maybe having a conversation about musical ideas. And so we started experimenting few things. And after like it was done, said that, turned to me and said that, you know, I didn't expect this from you, but it's quite interesting. I've never done it with any Japanese composer. Do it. And let's do it now. And this show, and I have this big audience of presenters and sponsors in Vancouver who like Japanese. Can you prepare something that we can present there? And that I really to prepare something, but I know that he's going to champion it because he now understands where I'm coming from and is enjoying it. And so that was basically the point that I felt that, okay, I really made a connection with this man. And we started working, and 2 years later, the piece was basically on stage with whatever success it got. So it what I'm trying to explain is that it takes really long time, and we need to ask many perhaps basic questions that often we don't ask about our work because it seems too obvious. It seems just normal. We know why we are doing it, and in fact, I remember when I was asking Yamai's son about some of these questions, uh, he wasn't the one that would give the first answer. It was often his students or his followers who, we were in a very traditional setting. So it was like, it was always with students who would give the answers. And these students are not like 10-year-olds. Some of them were like 60 years old, much older than the master, uh, but they were students. And so they knew about this because they have been thinking about it and talking and teaching and learning. And so they would say, and then he would say, yeah, it's correct. And then he would follow up. But it was interesting for him to see like, oh, I've been presenting this note to Japanese youth, and often I didn't know how to start. And now you're asking a question that will be relevant for them because they don't know the culture. And so it would be, it won't be easy. We need to do quite a bit of reading about everything that we would like to do, any experimentation. But then if you make that connection, you would find simple answer or simple solution for what you want to do. Because the other thing I would like to emphasize is that obviously we can do everything many different ways. In my experience, the best solution is the simple solution or easy way, not the hard way. I'll give an example. A few years back, we were presenting a work of a famous Japanese composer, Dai Fujikura. Was a piece for a mixed ensemble, Oceanus Breeze. You could find the recording. I can share with you a score maybe at some point. It is for like, I think 7 or 8 instruments. Like koto, sho, and then oboe, percussion. It's a mixed ensemble. One of the players that basically we had as a guest recommended that this piece is a good piece, we can play it. And I got this score, I contacted Dai, we became friends, and it was excited to see that someone outside England and Japan is interested to present his Japanese work, and especially it's not Japanese. So we have a kind of like, we built some camaraderie, and at some point when we were getting close to performance, I realized that there are some complex elements in the piece. For instance, there were excessively complicated rhythms and couplets on koto, which is like a horizontal harp, Japanese horizontal harp, or zither, which is not often, they're not famous for it. They're not famous for being very good with rhythm, let's say, put it that way. Or at least the ones that I work with were not the best. And it seemed that it's quite a fast passage, which would turn into almost like a glissando, ring, like that. But he had this complicated rhythm written for it. So I asked the player who played it, what's going on? And this is complicated, organizing it with the players that I know that we have, it's impossible. This koto player may not be able to play it. And she said that, no, this is not the difficult part. This is the difficult part. And I said that, no, this toplet, they can't even read it. Said that, no, this is just a gliss. So I was convinced that, okay, if she says that this is gliss, it is gliss, but let's double check. So I contacted Dai, and his response was quite informative. He said that, when I was writing this, I was very young and premature. I thought that I would like to time everything and be very pedantic about every detail. Now I know better that this is a gliss, and I just need to show the starting point. The rest of it is just a fast passage of note. So it doesn't matter if I like 11 over 13 here, or if I write 12 over 15, they're going to play the same thing no matter what. And I like those numbers because they're representative of something in the piece. So I haven't taken them out, but I know it's a gliss. So anyways, that was kind of like a very interesting learning point, that this could have been written down much easier for the player and would be more friendly for the players. And if no one knows about what was his intention or what he actually expects, they would be scared. And some players may not even want to touch the piece because of just those rhythms. In fact, I was convinced that our players won't be able to do it. And so it is kind of like always important to think what is the oral experience that you're after? What do you want to hear? What's the sound? And is this notation the simplest way of notating it? Or maybe there's another way. And often that comes through listening, to music, studying the scores, and perhaps even consulting with the players, like checking, okay, like if I want to do this, what would be the best way? And they often would say that, oh, just put a gliss, or put this, or write it down. Okay, I'm just wondering if anyone wants to ask.
Great. Yeah, this would be a good time for questions.
Yeah.
If not, I have a couple. If there's none from here, I have a couple that have come in.
Yes.
But I'll give the opportunity to those that are joining live first. Go ahead. Unmute yourself and go ahead if you'd like. Any comments or questions for Farshid? Okay, well, I'll just go ahead with a couple then. Oh, Werner, where did I see you unmute? Go ahead.
Farshid has mentioned a lot of great points about especially the notation aspects. And as we composers do nowadays, most of us, we type or we orchestrate most of our details on the computer to save time. Now, I would be interested in to see how he said that certain notations would be easier, not just for the players to play, but it's also less time consuming for us as composers to get all the notation down as efficient as possible for all the players, including the conductors too. And also, I'm interested in the tempo changes, the tempo notations. I always had problems with, the metric modulations or the when because with the conductors, I've been studying conducting for a while, and then this the tempo markings notations. I'm interested in if you have any kind of suggestions or recommendations or any examples of any compositions that might have issues for the orchestra, or the conductor or the performers in general.
Okay, that's a very good question. I guess one of the things I've learned is that let's try to make sure, I don't know if you can see my screen, I'm just sharing a part of actually the opera. One of the things that I learned is that the software is a tool that I'm using, and it shouldn't dictate how I'm writing the music. It should do what I want it to do. So if it has a limitation, it's something that I have to conquer and find a solution for. So for example, in this place that you're looking at, the squigglies are just graphics that I made, and I kind of like, I made it in this other software, I turn it to a JPEG, and I'm exporting it, importing it here. Or now, the other point that you ask about tempo and metric modulations, actually, this is a section that would be interesting about this piece. One of the things I learned working with the no singers was that the traditional notation that they have is always in kind of like, it's in a sort of a tablature system. They have like a box system, like with 8 rooms in each system. It is vertical, but it's basically the same phenomenon. And basically each box is considered as one beat. They're not necessarily equal the way that beats are equal in Western music, and they have a pattern, but they are treated as beats. So I realized the easiest way to communicate with those singers was to use their own system of 8, which is kind of like 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's not 5, 6, 7, 8. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 2, 2, 3, 4, sort of. So I made it like a 4+4 whenever I was working with those singers, and whenever I was doing something else, that was a different story. And then I needed just to communicate with the conductor that the beats, when he's counting the 8 beat measures, has some emphasis on the 3rd and 7th beat, and some others are a little bit faster, even rushed. So I didn't need to repeat it every measure. It was just kind of like was basically communicated orally. With the metronome and metric modulation, I think that as specific as you could is necessary. Use as many time signatures as you need. It as much be as much specific as you could. And I'll give you another example of like a point that I'm changing the tempo. I even sometimes put a arrow to specify like which beat exactly they should change, because the more detail you put in the score, the more time you save during rehearsals and workshops. No, I can't find it right now. Sorry. I can show you another. This is an orchestral work. So like very specific, you would give a time signature, just change the time signatures as needed, and then be as specific as you could be with your tempo. Now, like when my solo enters, at some point, I feel that I don't want it to be timed or measured as normal. So I'm using like a non-metric system. It's a graphic notation, approximately 25 seconds, with beats being around 60, but not necessarily. And then it's just boxes. And even when the orchestra starts to come in, they are following the same pattern. And I just gave them basically sort of the idea that where they should come in. There are some oral cues, and they can easily follow, which they can easily follow. And why that was relevant? Because actually, with this way, I could get the players to be as free from each other as they could. So over time, I can share this actually segment of music. They built a kind of like a very beautiful wash of plucked sounds that kind of like I couldn't get if I was putting it in time. The rhythms and meters would become very, very complicated and very hard to actually read for the players. So I found that this is a much easier way of doing it, writing it more like a aleatoric music rather than measured. At the same time, there are some certain indications that you would see, like even sort of a tempo that the soloist has to follow. And then occasionally I give him like, okay, you have to pause here. It's around five seconds. So, and I remember in rehearsals, Mark, this 5 second wasn't long enough. It was like 2 seconds. You didn't do enough. Or here you didn't spend 15 seconds. You went too fast. Or you spend too long. Just let's rush through that section a bit more. So a combination of notations and this section, as you see, like the flute is sort of measured, but the ensemble, rest of the ensemble, the orchestra is basically on their own time. Let me share with you this segment, if you don't mind. This is a flute concerto for a Chinese orchestra. It's actually a little giant Taiwanese orchestra, and Mark McGregor, flute player. the score becomes very normal. It just becomes a regular measured piece of music. But for that long actually section, I realized that the easiest way is just to keep it unmeasured. I can get that concept of chaos basically much easier, and the players can put it together much easier and would be more comfortable playing it. Well, I actually was very specific about the notes. So I was giving them exact notes that I want, and the harmonies and everything was changing over time. I don't know if this answered your questions, Werner.
Great. Thanks, Farshid. I just want to make sure to get to this one that was sent in by someone who can't be here. So the question is, if a composer is interested in delving into non-Western, writing for non-Western instruments, what advice would you give them, and what are some resources to help get them started?
Oh, the first thing, again, back to the first principle, listening. So they have to listen to different musics, find the ones that they enjoy, and then try to find the players that are around them that play those instruments. Make friends. It's basically, it goes back to all the basics that you do in conservatory or university. You have to make friends with the good players to play your music. You need to find people that are interested, because many of these players, for whatever reason, they're not interested, or they don't know what you want to do. So, and there have been so many bad works. Just very honest, like so many bad works, so many bad experimentations, like wrong experimentations, which at times could be offensive for the culture. So we need to be very cautious. I have a funny story. At one point I had an ensemble and we wanted to use a big gamelan gong, which was in D, like a low D. So I approached one gamelan ensemble to borrow their instrument, and I asked them, is there anything specific that I need to do about this instrument? Because I know you treat it as a very spiritual, religious instrument. And the answer was very interesting. They said, we don't care what you play with it, where you play with it, but you should never walk across it. Like if it's fallen on the floor, you shouldn't run on top of it or jump over it. That's all. So I realized, okay, this is a very weird thing. I mean, it never happened to jump over like a gong, but this is something that I need to make sure that I follow. That otherwise, if they see it, they may not be very happy. That they would say the second time, oh, I won't lend you the instrument. So we need to be very, very attentive to people's needs, even if it's a very special need, and learn their music. And there are lots of actually material nowadays online. I'll be happy if it's a specific, and then there are lots of musicians who are interested, like most of the ones that are coming from universities, they are interested and keen with new experiments and new sounds. So the best thing would be to approach those guys first. Or ensembles and orchestras like ours, like VICO. I see Rodney has his hands up.
Yes, I do.
Hi, Rodney.
It's exactly about VICO that I wish to speak, because Farshid was kind enough to invite me along with several other composers to write for string quartet and an instrument of our choice. We went to workshops and we learned about several non-Western instruments. I chose the oud. It's oud in Turkish, oud in Arabic. I learned a tremendous amount, but it was only through this that I was able to write something which I considered artistically successful. And I know that VICO gives these courses from time to time and offers these things. So I would encourage those composers who are among us now who are interested, and I assume you are because you're all still here, to be in touch with Vico? Is there some kind of mailing list, or do you do outreach for the courses that you do?
Yes, we do have we have a annual basically call for the workshops and the performances. The one for this year is coming out very soon. It's usually it should have happened much earlier, but because of COVID, it has been a little bit postponed, delayed. Uh, the last one was a little bit chaotic to close it, but the composers got a very good result. They got a professional recording of the works. So often we select an ensemble for composers to work with, and they work on that. But we also have another project, which hopefully after COVID would happen again, which is like a summer intense workshop. We did it a few times, like 2 weeks of workshops. Composers would have time every day to work with their musicians, and then at the end of 2 weeks they would get their pieces done. So either one of these are great opportunities in my opinion. But other than that, composers can always write to Vico and try, if they want to receive emails and be in the mailing list, they can request that from our wonderful communication manager. And we always are looking for young composers or composers in general who are interested, because often no one is interested. It is kind of like interesting topic. It's very similar to the situation of this collective of composers with limited. I don't know how to explain it, because we often consider it to be fringe. We are fringe either because of gender or race or nationality or religion or sexual orientation, but sort of considered to be a fringe of the artistic realm, unfortunately. The same way Vico is fringe. Often people don't want to write for it because right away you would be labeled that you only write for certain instruments. So in my opinion, that is a good place to be, because you can try more and you can try things that you won't be able to do it with other instruments. Like with shakuhachi, you can do what I was trying to do with flute easily. So that's basically, in my opinion, it's a good place if you have some specific sounds in your mind or you want to experiment with some specific sounds. That being said, we don't have all the instruments around. So it depends on musicians, and the ensemble is very individualized. So if a player moves, we are in a loss. Like the oud player that Rodney mentioned, Navid, he moved to Japan. We have to find another oud player, and it took a couple of experimentations. We got someone that was recommended, and he was very bad. And then we found another person that was fantastic. He is fantastic, and we're working with him. But also, like, I won't be surprised, Rodney, if Navid at some point soon wants to play your piece in Japan, because he has found interested people in it. So it's kind of like you will find kind of like another way of, like, a champion of your work. Basically, you found a champion of your work in Navid.
What is strange about working with instruments that you don't know anything about and having to learn things? I mean, I'm older, this means that I'm experiencing personal growth as an artist, artistic growth that often comes through working with a writer, working with a choreographer, working with it. But this is different because you're working with an instrumentalist, often highly skilled people in an area that you simply don't know. And you have to have the humility, the curiosity, and, as Farshid says, above all else, the ears to enter the sound world of the instrument and to be able to find, should you write for that instrument in the context of Western instruments or with other instruments from different cultures, to find a complementary timbre. But I would highly recommend the experience to all of you. Uh, do it for an instrument where you love the sound.
Yeah,
That,
exactly.
that is my best advice.
Yeah, and one thing is that some of the instruments that we love, sometimes they have challenges that we don't expect. So for instance, I was working with a sitar player. In Indian music, it may sound very strange. They don't have the concept of single note. They have groups of notes. So figures or gestures. So like when I was telling him play D, he had hard time playing it because he always felt that, oh, when I play this, I have to play that too. I can't do it without that. And it was very complicated for him to understand that he can just play that note without playing the rest. So we need to kind of like understand where they are coming from and try to connect. So it requires, as Rodney said, lots of humility, which is, in my opinion, it's a good thing for a composer because we always need to be humble in a sense because we need the players to understand and be able to play it. If they can't understand what we are doing, even if it's for a simple instrument, simple in a sense like a flute or violin or orchestra, Western orchestra, even if it's for that, if they don't understand what's going on in our mind, we would have a hard time connecting to anyone. Yeah.
And just to add to that, if folks are not familiar with what VICO does, I just put a link to our most recently live streamed concert that was part of the Montreal New Music Festival. I put that in the chat, and that's a really great representation.
Actually, Jana was conducting it.
I was conducting.
Jana was our fantastic conductor. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful piece by Farshid is featured on there, so you can treat yourself to that, as well as a number of other really wonderful works as well. And I can just reiterate what both Rodney and Farshid said. Like as a conductor, each time I come to work with VICO, it's a tremendously humbling experience because when you kind of dip your toe into, the realm of, the Chinese instruments and the, Iranian modes, and it's incredibly humbling and challenging, and it's an amazing experience. And to see it all come together and to see everyone grow together, and myself being one of those, amongst those that are growing. So yeah, just thought I'd throw that in, and I'll include that link to some of VICO's upcoming workshops and things in kind of the follow-up email from this workshop as well, so you can avail yourself of that.
Yeah, like another funny story I can tell. We're doing this workshop with the Roadrunner Trio, which is accordion, cello, and clarinet. Not very Western, all Western instruments. One of the composers in his score, he had an indication, play quietly, and then he has a dynamic of forte fortissimo. And my clarinet player was, and he was in a high register playing a multiphonic, which is a loud multiphonic. And he was just wondering, how can I play quietly this forte fortissimo loud gesture? And the composer couldn't explain. And he went on, and then at the end we realized, okay, let's play it mezzo forte, and that would solve the problem. But you can't have like a soft forte forte fortissimo. It just doesn't make sense. So some of them are very simple, but some of them are complicated. Like for instance, don't ever say, especially if you're dealing with other cultures, play beautiful, because beautiful means different in every culture.
Great. Yeah, that's a
good
subjective
terms, basically. Objective. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have any more questions for Farshid before we sign off for the day?
This is a general question. How do you become a member of the Allegra Composer Incubator program?
Oh yeah. So thanks for asking. So we just started. This is the inaugural edition of the program. Applications just closed about a month ago, and we have 6 mentees that are working with our mentorship team. And so we're hoping to make that an annual thing. So that will be, if as long as the funding gods smile upon us and grant us some money again next year to run the program, we will be advertising that, and that is a program specifically for female and minority composers to work with established Canadian composers for a period of 3 months, after which the pieces that were developed during that time are workshopped with the Allegra Chamber Orchestra. You get some feedback, and you work with myself as the conductor and some of our principal players. And then the piece is recorded. And in this instance, we're actually going to be live streaming it in place of a live performance. And so that will be part of a larger scale online festival called Festival. And so you can look out for that. That will be advertised mid to late June. Farshid is one of our mentors, as is Rodney Sharman. And some of the other mentors are Alice Pigny Ho, Jocelyn Morlock, Dorothy Chang, and Jennifer Butler. So we're really fortunate to have some really wonderful people to work with on our team. So yeah, thanks.
So apart from you said the woman composers, so you mentioned specifically ethnic, like visible minorities.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So what is that exactly? Kind of like visible minority? You talking about like indigenous, Asian, like
Yeah, that's a great question.
Caribbean, or what is that something like that?
Yeah, I mean, those that are traditionally underrepresented on our stages, as in the Western music tradition. So yeah, all of those groups that you mentioned would fall into that category. Yeah.
Okay. And just wonder if it all goes if there is another submission for that. You mentioned about the world premiere, like submission to become one of the composers. When is the next one? Is it like during the summer, the announcement?
That will probably be in about a year. So this session spans from February until June, and then we would likely be accepting submissions again in January 2022, which is kind of feels like a long ways away, but it's not.
Hopefully by then there will be a live concert.
Well, exactly. That we had originally conceived the program and these workshops to be a live experience, but we're pivoting and doing our best to bring it to as many people as we can in our new circumstances. Yeah, great. Well, I think we'll leave it there for today. Thank you so much to Farshid for a wonderful presentation. And yeah, look for the recording that you can refer to later on. And thank you so much for your time and your insights. And we look forward to seeing and hearing more.
I appreciate the opportunity from Allegra and Jana. And in general, I think this is one of the most fantastic projects in Canada that's happening now, and I hope that it can continue and grow over years.
Yes, absolutely. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and one other thing maybe I can say at the end.
Yeah.
For the young composers, I was just talking actually to my students the other day. Build a community. Mm-hmm. Build your community and be part of the community, but build the community, make it stronger, because the community can create opportunities and solve small problems that you have easily. But if you live on your own, it's very difficult. So just try to be part of groups, and doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything, but try to be part of group of friends and colleagues.
Yeah,
looks like this one with the there are more lectures coming on, so it looks like it's becoming a community with these. I see there's other lectures coming up.
Yes, absolutely. And that was part of the the initiative as well, was to provide an information in a safe community, and that you have others to discuss it with. So actually our next workshop is in 2 weeks on February 9th with Rodney Sharman, who you saw on the call earlier, and he will be joined by Albertina Chan, and they're going to do a great segment on writing for harp, which can be a little bit of an intimidating prospect for composers. So we hope that you'll have some great insights and questions that you can bring to Rodney, and make yourself avail yourself of his expertise, because he is a bit of a harp specialist. So
yeah,
awesome.
yes.
Well, and it's so great to see some of our mentees here as well. So I see Palas and Sasha and Ashley. So welcome, glad you were able to be here. And look forward to seeing you guys at the next ones. So same login info, same place, all the same. Great. All right, well, everyone take care.
Do we need to register again for the next one?
That's okay. If I have you on the list, you'll receive the info and any updates. And we have room for up to 20 extra people outside of the program. So I don't think we'll have more than 20.
Okay.
So that it looks like that'll be fine.
Okay, so just wait for the email link for in 2 weeks then. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll send a reminder as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everyone. Stay healthy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.